Okay, so one of the last stories I wanted to cover this year is the data completion for Returnal. Anyone who has played Returnal, according to the game's trophy data, only 10% of all players who've played Returnal have actually completed it. And this is very interesting because that number is extremely low. Extremely low. Now, the reason for this, according to the article, is that the game is apparently extremely difficult. I denounce this, even though I haven't played the game myself. I denounce this because, the Souls games are apparently difficult too, but those games have a higher completion percentage compared to this game. Just about any apparent difficult game has a higher completion rate than Returnal. 10% is extremely low. And then if you actually look at the fine-tuned data for this, apparently there's 3 acts. I think there's like 5 or 6 levels or some shit. Only 20%, a little over 20%, have completed the game's second act. And then that number drops again by the time you reach the act 3. So what really went wrong with Returnal? Because if you compare it to more popular games, such as God of War, which has a nearly 50% completion rate, or The Last of Us 2, which has a 59% completion rate, why is the completion rate for Returnal so low, when technically it's a much shorter game than The Last of Us or God of War? It seems that despite all of the critical acclaim that this game has received, none of it really mattered, because most of the players that played this did not enjoy it, clearly. And we've seen this with other games too. A perfect example would be Alien Isolation. That's the quintessential example, or at least it was, until this game came out. Just because a game has high review scores doesn't mean it's actually that good. Hell, God of War and The Last of Us 2 were both granted 10 out of 10s unanimously from dozens upon dozens of video game publications. Yet, with God of War, less than half of all players that played it actually finished it. And with The Last of Us 2, you have 60%, which is better than most games, but that game still ended up pissing off a lot of people. So this is another lesson. This game is another lesson that review scores doesn't translate the quality. High review scores doesn't translate the quality. And then in Returnal's case, I believe the game came out in March. Within a few months' time, around July, late July, early August, the game only sold a little over 500,000 copies. There are video games that sell 1 million within their first 2 weeks. There are some that sell even more than that within the first few days of their release. Now, I get it. Returnal is more of a niche game. Returnal is only available on a closed platform that's not openly available to the public, which is the PlayStation 5. But if you were to compare Returnal to some of the other PS5 exclusives like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, for example, there's really no reason why this game should have sold this many copies within its first few months. And then you wonder why the game wasn't nominated for Game of the Year. I don't even think these gaming journalists keep track of which games they hand high scores to. Because Returnal, what essentially happened to Returnal is that the game came out and it was basically forgotten very quickly. And then the difficulty part of it is really artificial because the developer, Housemarque, they've neglected to put traditional save settings in Returnal. So a lot of people dropped the game just for that reason, even if they enjoyed the mechanics and shit. So an argument must be had. This game clearly didn't succeed in the way that it probably would have if the developers had done things that were more traditional to make the game a more enjoyable experience. And it's another prime example that difficulty is overrated. I would much rather play a game that's fun than play a game that was designed to be frustrating. For that reason, this is why the game only sold 560,000 copies within its first few months after release. This is why the game wasn't nominated for Game of the Year. This is why Returnal is just an overrated mess. I had a poll on the channel a few weeks ago that asked the question, what is the most overrated video game of 2021? And Returnal by far was the winner of that poll. This game should be an example to other development studios. Make a game that's fun first, right? And then focus on other things like difficulty, but don't try and force difficulty into a game by developing stupid shit that doesn't make any sense, like the game not having any traditional save features, or forcing players to restart a level from the beginning, and there being no checkpoints. When you start to do that, this is what happens. You're going to get players that will not buy your game. You're going to get players that will buy your game, but then are going to trade it in within the same week that they got it. You're going to have players that want to finish the game, that want to play more of the game, but can't because the game requires too much time from the player. And you're going to get a low percentage of completion. And is it really worth it if only 10% of all the players who play your game actually finish it? At that point, you just done wasted your time. As a development studio, you've just done wasted your time at that point. Very sad. So after doing some fine-tuned searching, I have discovered that Housemarque is a company that's based in Finland, and they have around 80 employees as of 2020, last year. So basically, they've wasted the time of the majority of, well, not the majority of, everyone who worked on this game for Returnal. They wasted their time because only 10% of everyone who bought their game actually saw the damn thing through from start to finish. Now, the completion rates for video games, and this is why I prefer movies to video games, because with movies, the whole point is you can rewatch them again and again and then pick up on new things and whatnot. Video games don't really work like that. Video games are developed to be one complete experience that's supposed to last for an extended period of time. But most people, especially as you get older, don't really have that kind of time, or don't really have the patience to put in that kind of time into one particular thing. Therefore, it's best as a games developer to develop a game that's going to respect the time of the player. And most video game developers don't do that. This is why Resident Evil Village is the highest completed game that's been released this year, because it's a game that respects the time of the player. It's a game that only lasts for a certain period of hours, and then they put in things, Capcom, this is what they do with their games. They put in various challenges and rewards and different things like that in order to give the player more reason to go back and replay the same experience again. But again, that's what Capcom does. Most companies don't do what Capcom does. This fucking company right here, they deliberately created a game whose sole purpose was to piss the player off. And as a result, less than 25% of all the people who played Returnal made it to the second act of the game. And then only 10% made it to Act 3. They wasted the time of all of these employees right here. If I was working at Housemarque, I'd put in my resignation immediately, and I'd go work for a different company. Once again, develop a fun game first, and then worry about the other stuff later, the small stuff. Difficulty is one of those things. That's not what this company did, and they paid for it in sales and in critical reception, not from gaming journalists who are paid to play and critique these things for a living, but from general consumers. Making a game that's going to respect the player's time should be the #1 focus of every video game developer. Every development studio should design their games around this concept. Make a game that will respect the player's time first and foremost, and then you'll be rewarded. Then your game will actually sell.